G'day, I'm Pete Hughes, and you've clicked on the Reach Australia podcast. This is the second of 4 workshops on the idea of a multi-site church, looking to plant churches all over our area and country. This workshop was brought to you by Paul and Sue Harrington, who lead the Trinity Network. Apologies for the audio. Audio is not fantastic, but we've done the best we can, and it's still an important one to watch and listen to. If you would like to watch the video, it will be available on YouTube or on Spotify, but it is still worth listening to. Enjoy.
It's great to be here today, and terrific actually to reconnect with Wade. I remember going to that conference, Exponential, back in the day, and for the first time, we've been planting churches for a few years, and suddenly I felt like I had this sort of language and the categories to sort of put us into, to understand what we've been doing. So it's great to reconnect, apart from the fact that he is wonderful at providing coffee. That's always a good thing to do. So that's great. This will work, no doubt. No. Where should I point it? So there you go. This is Sue and I back in the day. So the point of this slide is my staff love to put in embarrassing photos of us. That's really what you need to know. But the reality is, what I'm about to do, Sue and I are about to do, is to pick up on 30 years and squeeze it into 30 minutes. And that's worth bearing in mind, because from where I'm standing, it's going to sound a lot smoother and more straightforward because I'm summarising over a long period of time. But sometimes when I've been sitting where you are and someone does this, I think it's very out of reach and unachievable, or it looks too easy almost. So I guess just bear that in mind, that's the situation. We're going to ramble through a whole series of things very quickly, and we'll see how we go. I'm not sure I can... there we go. Here's where we're heading. I want to give you an overview of what's occurred in the network over the last 30 years. Sue's going to pick up on the network culture, because I think that's really critical as we think through who we are. What I want to then do is do a deep dive into a church plant that's planted. So that'll make sense when we get to it. And then, if we've got time, a few things that we've learned at the other end. So that's where we're going. So I think we're a church planting network with multi-site features. That's how I describe us. And you'll be able to work out what you think we are. I don't care what we're called, but it is kind of what Wade was saying, that when you're thinking about this whole church planting multi-site world, you're really on a continuum, and you're able to make choices as you go along and pick and select different features that actually work for your context or work for your ecclesiastical framework, or whatever it is. So this is how I describe us. Let me tell you a little bit about us background-wise. Trinity Church Adelaide, this is another church in the city, founded in 1836, so the first sort of pioneer church, sandstone place right in the heart of the city. It actually was a church that struggled right up until World War II. So there are a number of times where we thought we'd sell the property, not me personally, but we'd borrow that. Yeah, that's right. It has been around a while, but not that long. And then post-World War II, the place started to flourish. I think motor vehicle, some of that was leadership, all that sort of stuff. But you can see from the graph that we sort of bounced up to about a church of 800 in the heart of the city and stayed there. And the reason we stayed there was... that's it. Essentially, we'd run multiple services. We had a site that was a certain size. So that led us to start thinking through, well, what do we actually do? Can I get the next slide? Can you organise that for me? No, that's okay. That's fine. Here was our challenge. Church was full. When you've got a full building, you start to lose your evangelistic edge, because everyone looks around and goes, we're full, we're done. So that was our situation in terms of where we're up to. We lacked any sense of cohesion about where we're going because we were full, we were done. And denominationally, that meant we were done because we were in that location, couldn't go anywhere. When we started talking about church planting with the denomination, it was just tense. And it was tense anyway because we're in a liberal diocese, it's become more liberal, and we were the evangelical sort of church in the heart of the city. There's probably half a dozen other evangelical Anglicans, but we really had a target on us from a diocesan point of view. And to talk about church planting, given our denominational polity, was likely to get us into a lot of trouble. So that was the reality of it. Okay, so here are the options we're trying to work through. Go larger on the same site. We put a block to the rear of our church in 1994, so we had the capacity to build bigger. Or reform the diocese, do that hard sort of work of seeing cross it off fairly quickly. The third one was appealing from my point of view. Bypass the diocese, that seemed like we were going to go church planting. We thought about all sorts of other different options as well, but that's really what we're trying to work out. And let me go back. This is eventually what we decided we would do. So I'm backmasking at this point. Probably this statement of our thinking about what we're trying to do as a network was one we probably put to paper in about, computer in about 2010. So it was into the bit of captures actually what we've been talking about doing in a fairly clear sort of way. So we read it, make a couple of comments. In response to God's grace, the Trinity Network of churches exists to plant a growing and healthy network of disciple-making churches and ministries across Adelaide and South Australia and to send disciples into the world for the glory of God. Now, this is totally unmemorable, but it is descriptively accurate. Okay, we start with the, in response to God's grace, we deliberately have it there. You pick up what we're doing is we're framing Ephesians chapter 1. That's our thinking. And one of the reasons for that was because in an earlier trip to the States, and let me say I have learned and been so thankful for much in the States, but when I went there in the late 90s, what I kept hearing from pastor after pastor of large churches was what they were going to do for God, what their church was going to accomplish for God. And I came away feeling extraordinarily worried, actually, about the fact that it felt so Arminian. And the driving force didn't seem to be God's powerful initiative towards us in his Son through the gospel. And so I wanted to make sure that we always started with what God had done for us, not with what we were going to do for God, because that always seems to me to be responsive to God's initiative with us. There's stuff in the middle that probably doesn't matter too much, really. God's grace for his glory. The stuff in the middle is a statement for a network, not for a church. You understand that? This would be a lousy statement for a church, but it's okay for a network thinking about what a group of churches are going to do. To actually plant churches that make disciples, is really at the heart of what we do. That became sort of the template for our thinking about what we're going to do. What we then did, so I became the senior pastor there in 1993, and from 94 through to 99 was a period of trying to get a large, defensively moded evangelical and a liberal diocese church moving, if that makes sense. So when Sue and I joined the church, we actually joined the church in 1978 when we became Christians. And so Trinity, this church, centre of Adelaide. And when we arrived, they used to hand out leaflets on Sunday. And on the front of the leaflet was, "Here we stand." And that was actually right. And if any liberal tried to get over the wall of the castle, we would spear them and throw them. It was a very, defensively stanced sort of church, very protective. And it's still in good stead, but it meant a lot of work to think about next steps. We spent 5 years starting to talk about what do you do with the full church? There are lots of people in our city and state who are lost. We can't afford just to be full. Where are we going to go? How are we going to reach the lost, given who we are and our particular context? What we then did was Later in the decade, 1999, we started a new internal congregation, not a multi-site, but a new internal congregation on the same site. And then in 2002, we planted. So the 99 internal thing was a deliberate first strike at planting. We said we're starting this new congregation, see how we go starting something new before we plant off-site. We want to learn with minimal problems, barriers, structures, and then from that we'll plant in a couple of years' time. So it was part of that sort of reorienting a church and thinking of that sort of way. We planted our first church in 2001. That was about, so thinking, I listened to Wade and others. We planted on a 20-minute ring around the mother church. Okay, so we had people travelling for up to 30 minutes to get to our site. We figured if we planted on a 20-minute ring, we could then in due course see those churches planting further afield because we want to reach Adelaide and South Australia with the gospel. So we figured that'd be the way to go about it. It would have been easy to plant closer, I think, but strategically better to push that sort of boundary. So was our thinking, plant churches that would plant churches. The Dyson response, so I've been working with a task force in the diocese for church planting for several years. I explained to the Archbishop we were planting a church. He nodded, he smiled, and now when we planted, I realised he thought it was never going to happen. So when I told him what we were doing, he was extraordinarily angry, threatened to get me kicked out of the Anglican Church, strip me of my licence, and just make life very difficult. So because I'm intuitive, right, I worked out he wasn't pleased. We sort of went from there. So, and that was just our context, really. This gives you the timeline of the plants. This is really sort of quick. So from 1836 to 2001, let me go back. Can we go forward? I'm having trouble with there we go. This just gives you the sequence of the 13 church plants from the city. And you'll see that we just kept at it. And then in more recent years, sort of 2015 following, we built momentum and we just kept planting. This next diagram, this gives you the sort of umbrella. Remember I said what we were trying to do was plant churches or planting churches? This is what's happened. So 2001 we plant Moorgate, 2010 it plants further down the road to Mount Barker, 2015 Mount Barker essentially plants to Victor Harbour. And you see that. The city church is planted 5 times and there are 8 churches that have been planted from those 5 churches across the network. Remembering what we're trying to do is reach a city, reach a state. So we want to plant churches that plant churches. Every time we had a launch Sunday for a church plant, I think I've missed one of those, but every time we have prayed that God would give this church, launching today, the privilege of planting another church. And we've signed that, had that as part of our DNA, part of our thinking, because we want to reach more people with the gospel across our city and across our state. So that's been the sort of underlying thinking and prevailing sort of perspective that we've had. And for me, the exciting thing of seeing churches planting, that's been extraordinarily encouraging. And it's been done at great sacrifice, because any church that's been planted never wants to think about doing it themselves by nature. Like it's a hard gig. And to think I'm just going to lop off an arm and send it down the road is challenging, I think. This is the map of what's gone on. So if you go from Golden Grove, that's about half an hour north of the mother church. If you go down south to the inset of Victor Harbour, we're talking an hour and a half south. So it's about two hours between the northernmost point and the southernmost point. And if you go to Mount Barker, that's about 40 minutes from the city. We're just trying to keep the gospel moving out in this sort of network, and we kept aiming in that direction. I don't know if these are going. Oh, there we go. The thing to know about us is that we see ourselves as a family of churches, right? So we have thought of ourselves as a network of family that run about the same thing. So every church, all our staff, they have local church thinking and purpose, but they are thinking I'm part of a family that are trying to do so much more and to reach a whole stack more people in terms of where we're going. And this gives you the metrics on what's happened attendance-wise. So if I superimpose the church planting, you'd see growth has been linked to when we planted. So we started with about 800. We're now at about 2,600 a Sunday in terms of the network across those 14 churches. And, we had that sort of dip during COVID, like most of the Western world. And then we just sort of popped back into that sort of growth space. Graphs like this are sort of helpful. And what I keep thinking is that every part of this graph represents people. And what we've seen over the last 20 plus years is we've seen more and more people coming under the sound of the gospel, lots of people getting converted, lots of people growing to maturity. This is a graph full of individuals, and that's really what we've been keen to do. But it's also kind of a picture of trying to reach an ever-increasing number of people with the gospel in our part of the world. This gives you a breakdown into the 13 church plants in terms of their growth over the first 5 years. So you see the starter groups at the beginning, and with those area, that's the dark bit on the left-hand side, and see the way in which we've planted with a view to seeing more people reach with the gospel and trying to grow. So we've had a fairly consistent pattern of planting and reaching new people with the gospel and growing. A couple of the churches, where there's variation, if you ask me to tell you why, I can tell you why. I can actually explain why we've got a different trajectory for all sorts of internal and external reasons. But the general movement has been sort of to the growing end of the screen. And again, that's been, helpful and healthy in terms of the way we've contacted. The other thing is, as we've planted more churches, we've learned more things. We've learned the mistakes we've made. We've learned some of the things that, we could have done better. So we've learned as a family of churches. So someone plants this in, plant number 13. There are 12 people he looks to for finding out what happened, and learning from. So we're in that sort of school of thinking about how we both plant and grow churches, which I think has been healthy. The other thing is, once we're getting up this end of the graph, we're seeing more of our churches cooperating together to plant churches. So often there's a church that's the core church that's planting, but again, 2 or 3 churches might be providing people into that space, because as we've spread, we're starting to go to sort of triangulated spots, which I think is really helpful to see people cooperating again in that sort of space. We're going to talk about governance just for a bit, that is the structure of our leadership stuff. So I'm really changing pace here, but the thing that we worked out fairly early on was that unless we kept rethinking our governance space, we put out sort of glass ceilings that we keep bouncing off. And so this is where we started. We had the green church as the mother church right in the centre. We had a classic Anglican sort of structure. Trustees are a bit unique to our situation because we operate under a trustee, but that's sort of, thing. When we planted our first church at Aldgate, they had a local leadership team, but governance-wise, they come under the authority of the mother church. So it was a mother-daughter branch church sort of operation. And that was the model we used for the first 4 churches. Okay? Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what was happening by the time we got to 4 churches? Want to throw it out there? Yeah, it was a bit messy actually. Yeah, what I was finding was, so I'm in the middle here trying to look after these pastors, and they'd all become teenagers overnight. They grow up so fast, and they all wanted to do their own thing, their own steam, and didn't really like the idea of being accountable to another church effectively. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. We can't keep doing this and have good ownership of being a network trying to reach out if it's all still centred on a historic mother church in the centre of the city. So we changed it around. The next slide might come up. Yep, there it is. What we did was we took the mother church out of the centre and put it with the other churches, governance-wise. We set up a board that operated for the whole network, that owned that vision statement that I just referred to. I was effectively, if you're thinking corporate speak, the CEO in this space, and we started having these churches all aligned, all on about the same thing. Now, this was a much healthier sort of structure for where we're up to, and really gave ownership. And for those we had a limited company for the board. Every other church was an incorporated association. Okay, and the board essentially had very high technical authority over local churches, but that was delegated out so that the local churches had a high level of autonomy for making good ministry decisions on the ground. I can talk about that more if you're curious, but that's where we moved to. Then by the time we got to 2018, we had this number of churches. And what was our problem at this point? It was the senior network pastor. Okay? It was me. Because you can't keep multiplying out like that and think you can keep investing and growing and developing. We're going to, again, another glass ceiling sort of moment that was profoundly obvious once you see it on paper. That was our situation. And I wondered why I was getting tighter and greyer and stuff like that. And essentially that was it. So we, again, moved it up again into this. So what we did was we broke into regions in order to sort of group into geographical spaces. Yeah, and you'll all be able to identify this in your own sort of denominational frameworks. Yeah. So different regions around Adelaide, I appointed some senior pastors to sort of lead pastors in spaces, to look after pastors, and also think through how we do the vision for a region. How do we actually see the churches in this region cooperate to plant more churches to reach more people in Adelaide and South Australia? So it broke down this. The other advantage with this was I've been thinking, I put a paper to the board about 7 years ago on succession planning, and not because I was planning immediately to retire or anything, but I think we had to move forward and build the structures in order so that my departure would not be noticed. So I figured that investing in some key leaders in our network and thought about the bigger picture of where we're going, as well as caring for other pastors and thinking strategically about their regions, was the best way to raise up people with responsibility, ownership as we move forward. So that was the grey boxes are the sort of church plans that we've got in mind for the future. I reckon and I heard lots of you earlier on, when you're in this space of thinking about planting, what tends to happen in this government space is that, so first church plant, I send off a church planter, we are really good friends, right? So we know everything's going to be fine, because we're friends, we trust each other. And actually, that did cover a multitude of sins. The lack of clarity over the relationship between the mother and the daughter church really could have caused us to hit a wall very quickly. By the time we got to 3 or 4 churches, it was obvious because different issues were arising, and we just hadn't done the work to clarify the nature of the relationship. And so we had to do quite a bit of thinking in order to provide clarity for everybody about how this was all going to work and how we're going to work healthily together. We didn't want it to be overly cumbersome. It's horrible to work in a context where you're governed by rules and handbooks, but we did want some level of mutual understanding about how we're going to proceed in this network sort of space. So I think that's a bit of advice I'd throw out if you're thinking about where you're going. Try and get clarity before you start as much as possible on some of these details. The structure of our board, we have trustees under our trustee, have 2 appointments. I'm there. I get to appoint 2 people, the senior pastors get to appoint 3. We never thought we'd have a representative board because we figured the big church in the city would dominate the voting. So we wanted to have a board that had the appropriate people and represented our ownership of our vision as we move forward. This represents our local church leadership team structure. Again, very similar. The senior pastor on this team appoints 2 people. There are 2 people elected by the congregation. They have the ability to second 2 people. We wanted sensible size, flexibility to get the right people in the room who are godly and able, so we just created. Now, I'm not thinking you should do this. All I'm saying is you should think about what you need. I have friends in the Anglican system in Sydney, and the thing I say to them is I think the rule books for Sydney and the way they structure leadership is designed for churches of 211 people. Okay, that is, it's cumbersomely protective and guarded and distributed, and it's not designed to actually achieve anything. I don't think, to be quite honest. And some of you probably get what I'm saying if you're in that system. We're trying to work out a system that helps us get stuff done by good and godly people who have the right abilities in the room to help us think along those sort of lines. That's why we operate. I'm not sure. I don't think it's perfect at all, but it's a lot better than some of the alternatives, I think. Yeah. I'll just keep pressing this clicker. There we go. I'm going to hand over to Sue because I think one of the big things about our network is less to do with the structures and what's happened and everything like that, more to do with how we roll together. So Sue's going to fill it.
Well, God cares not just about what we do, but obviously our motivations and how we carry out what we want to do. A healthy Christian culture is essential. And so we've got up there 5 key aspects of the Trinity DNA. And this is the sort of DNA that we want wherever we went. So we might change, if we were in Sydney, we might use a different network structure, but we want the same sort of DNA. So the first one is that everything we do flows from God's grace. Our deepest desire is that every action within Trinity, as an individual, as a church, and as a network, reflects our gratitude to God for the grace that He's given us, for all that He's done for us, and that we want to do that for His glory. So His grace and His glory, as Paul's already mentioned. So this is the foundation of the vision statement, but we also want it to grip our hearts, the hearts of every leader, the hearts of every member of our congregations. It's actually similar to healthy parenting, and you'll see that picture up there. We want real spiritual growth. We don't just want to staple the fruit on the tree. That's Paul Tripp, if any of you have read one of his books about parenting. You actually want it to come from deep roots in our love for God and our knowledge of God. And so that's what we want to see in our churches. A visiting speaker once said that that the thing that they were struck as they talked to the different leaders was how many people use the phrase, "Oh, in God's kindness," such and such. And so we are absolutely overwrought by God's kindness and thankfulness for what He's done for us individually, for our churches, for the network, but just all that He's done for us in Christ. Then, of course, we want it to flow into love for God's people. If we don't have that, then all's lost, isn't it? That's an essential part of the DNA of Trinity, and that does drive our church planting efforts. There are often tears when we send people off. We have our final Sunday at the sending church. People are in tears. There's real grief. But then I keep thinking, well, wouldn't it be sad if it wasn't sad? If you didn't care if a group went off. So the grief is real. And if you're thinking about doing it, I think you have to really understand that the grief is real, but the joy is real too of seeing others come to Christ. And time again, and all the research shows that church plants are a very effective tool on the whole for bringing new people to come to know Jesus. And we've also found bringing people who are de-churched back to God. So people are heading towards hell, and we see them brought into the precious family of God. So planting is a sacrifice, but it's really worth it. And that's something that we want very much in our DNA at Trinity. And so our love for God, actually, one way that that is shown, and our love for people is through this church planting. We also want humble and servant-hearted leaders. And that's really a critical part of the Trinity culture. We tell new staff, actually, you will be given respect and love as a leader at Trinity, and you won't have to earn it. It's not sort of, let them prove it and then you'll have it. You will be given it, however, you can lose it. If you don't love people, if you use leadership as a platform for ego, for your own idol, then you can lose it. So we're explicitly looking out for humble leaders that trust in God and whose who they are is rested on their leadership. We're explicitly thankful as leaders amongst the Trinity congregations for the fact that the congregations pay our wages. And I think it's really good to thank our congregations for that. It's a privilege to be able to lead God's people. But it is a partnership, and of course the job of the leaders is to equip the saints for works of ministry, ensuring God's people flourish for his glory. So that humble, servant-hearted leadership is critical to the Trinity DNA. And really part of it, it's really 3.point B, but well, there's 4, is valuing leadership households. And we've spent a lot of time on that, and Paul and I individually spent a lot of time together, a lot of time on this. While there's no expectations, for example, for pastors' wives, like the classic running of the children's program, some of them do, but a lot of them don't, they're seen as ministry partners. And currently we've got 31 pastors' wives in the Trinity Network, but they're all at different life stages. They've all got different gifts. They've all got different challenges and circumstances and opportunities. And it's the same for the husbands of our married female staff members or the spouses of our executive team. What we want is for the spouses to be sold out for Jesus, supporting their spouse, loving God's people with the unique opportunities they have. And that will look so different on the ground for different people at different stages and in different circumstances. But we also want the kids of the staff families to think, well, firstly, we want them to grow up to love Jesus. But we also want them to think that it's a privilege to be part of a ministry family. And we've worked really hard at that. And think through lots of big and little ways that we can do that. Things like Christmas, the kids get a little gift attached to a helium balloon. That kicks off the Christmas season for people. We have Year 12 staff survival packs for the staff kids. So there's different things like that we do. Pastors' wives, I take them away for a few days, somewhere between a conference and a retreat. We have some input and some relaxation time. And the trustees of the church now pay for that. And so that is a very you are valued. It's important what you're doing as your household as a team. It started off with just a few of us when there was just a few staff wives sitting down in our combi, down to a holiday house rented, but now it's become more formal. We've kept changing. Initially, I would meet with the group of pastors' wives, and we'd read the Bible, we'd pray, we'd talk about giving or whatever it might be, or issues that were coming up, like what do you do with triangulation, whatever it might be. But now they meet in area groups. We have kick-offs, we have high teas, those sort of things. Anyway, so we just work through what is going to be helpful with all of that. So finally, you want generous partnership with, as a Trinity Network, as individuals and as churches, we want to be in generous partnership with other churches and ministries. So what we're doing in Adelaide is a drop in the bucket compared to all the non-Christians that need to be saved and all the Christians that need to be developed. So we've been saved into the body of Christ, which is far bigger than Trinity. So we want many healthy, growing churches and networks and ministries throughout South Australia, Australia and the world. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 1, chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, talks about partnership in the gospel and how thankful he is of that. So we do want a generous culture, a network church of individuals who want to be generous with experience and resources and time that God's given us. So we network with for example, and it's very mutual with Reach Australia. We're really thankful for that. AFES, CMS, Bible College of South Australia, City Workers Ministries, Bush Church Aid, so a range of organisations we want to strengthen. We talk about the gospel ecosystem in Adelaide because as they're strong, we're strong, and vice versa. We want significant gospel change in our very spiritually dry place in Adelaide. And we think there needs to be, at least 20 networks like Trinity for that to see a significant change. Paul spends, for example, it's quite a lot of his time with other gospel leaders and churches to try and encourage that. So to sustain a culture, that's the culture we want, we desire, we pray for, but it needs to be intentional. We need to spend time on it. We need to keep going back to it. As leaders, we're key in drivers and models. And so, of course, we've got to remain connected to Christ so that our culture actually really does reflect and glorify God.
I want to change pace for just a moment. You may have been listening, you've seen the graphs, and possibly thought, well, if I inherited a church of 800 people, we would have done the same thing. And many of you are probably thinking, I'm in a much smaller church context. How would I go about it, given it is a bit smaller? What I want to do is do a deep dive into a section of our network. So Modbury Church got planted in 2010. We sent off about 80 people. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. My experience is that the sending pastor always thinks he sent more people than the church planter did. So I remember reading a report where I thought we'd sent about 80 people to a church plant, and the sending pastor said he started with 3 people in his laundry. I then had to work out what he was talking about. But I think it was about 80 people we sent to Modbury in 2010. And then you'll see that what's happened is they planted this church, planted 2016, 2020, 2022. So the church grew probably to about 180, and then it is planted fairly quickly over a period of time, 3 further churches. Now, if you're in a church of 180 and you know that you've got to aim to try and send 50, if at all possible, to a church plant, you know that for a pastor, for a church family, that is really hard going, really tough. But, of course, the reason you do it is because you want to see more people reach with the gospel. So it's not about your church and your church's health. It's about the gospel going out to more and more people. So that's what these guys have done. What I thought I'd do is just show you the bounce back factor for this church at Modbury, because I think the great fear for pastors when you're planting is this could signal the death knell of another church, especially if we're sending a big chunk of our people. So just to explain, what we've got is attendance giving. They're very, as metrics go, they're as basic as you can get, but they're easy to measure. When Modbury planted Golden Grove, they lost 20% of their attendance in the first year. The reality was they actually sent 30% of their people, but we're counting the first year when a whole lot of people joined the mother church again. What we found is that churches that are sending, that are concerned to reach, are churches that are growing, so they keep growing. That's reality. So they never actually sink to the level, numbers-wise, of the number that they send, right? And then by the time you get to year 2, after Golden Grove, they're bigger than what they were before they sent. That's the reality. and they kept growing. When Para Hills was planted, so we're talking COVID, okay, which is profound because this was not the time for inviting people to church. And so it was sort of an interesting time to plant. They were still behind, and yet we had this opportunity to plant 2022, so they went again. It just seemed like something they should do. The senior pastor was Stephen George. Stephen was there for all three plants. He's been the one who sent, and full of courage. But Cedarway post-COVID quickly bounces back in terms of numbers, keeps growing. Modbury is now the biggest it's ever been. It's bigger than it was before it started. When you come to the finances we found recover faster than the people. And I reckon here's what happens. You send people, and you'll see that the numbers, the percentage of giving is actually larger than the number of people going in every case. Because often the people who go planting, the people who are absolutely gripped with passion for what's going to happen. So they're very generous people. When they go, the people who are left behind, they really buy into the vision and they step up. We want to be a church that reaches out with the gospel to see others, and they give more. And we just found that's been the bounce back factor. So in terms of the best thing for your budget, right, is to send people out to church. I know that's hard to believe, but it is. It makes sense, doesn't it? Healthy churches and growing churches, not just numerically, but also in terms of their finances. It breeds generosity. And the fear is, and now I could replay this for every single church that's planted, and you will see exactly the same metrics on all 13. Right? They'll vary slightly, but it's essentially the same picture every time. I only put it up there to encourage you to be courageous, and also to encourage you, no matter what your size, that this is within reach. These guys, 170 maybe when they had planted the first time, having grown from 80. Now, here's the difficulty, and I just throw this in at this point. What we discovered fairly early on was that when a church planted, all the people going had huge energy and buy-in. They wanted to see things happen. And the people who remained felt like they're left behind. Like, I remember the first time, 2001, we sent off 80 people, just left 720 behind. Hardly any, sort of I went there on the Sunday after the plant turned up, and it looked like there'd been a funeral. I came to, what was us, we're only 720. It wasn't so much that, it was the loss of friends, the loss of, and also, fair enough, the AU got up and went when you get up and goes, and we sort of had the 720 left behind us. It's a different sort of feel. What we've worked out is that when we send this clarity around what they're trying to do, then need to rework the sense of purpose that we have for those who are staying behind. We have a sort of mission planting team, and we have a mission team at home thinking about, okay, how are we going to keep doing the same thing here? And so the identity of the mother church is not tied up with the plant. The identity of the mother church is keep doing what they're doing and hopefully backing up to it again. That's been the sort of thinking. So that's why, Modbury's been able to do it 3 times, I think. Not sure where I meant to be playing this. There we go. This gives you the graph of the attendance, the cumulative attendance across these 4 churches. So we have a church that's 180 or 160 or whatever it was, building, and then plants. And then plants again, and then plants again. We're now in a position where the overall attendance for these churches is closer to 600 a Sunday, from a planting group of 80, and where the churches reached, which was about 170 or 180. I can't imagine we would have done that staying in just one church, given the location without huge investment in property. But what we have seen, so these 4 churches now have an annual time when they get together for a celebration. And I tell you what, it is quite something to be in a room with all 4 churches being able to say, we are in this together, and we're in 4 locations, but this, it really is just a special time for them together and to celebrate what God has done for them and through them. The next thing, though, is that I'll get another slide up soon. So we had the Modbury Grove, Parrot Hills, Campbelltown. These 4 churches are now thinking through how they will together plant 3 more churches. Okay. That's churches, the plant churches, the plant churches, the plant churches. So this is owned by these 4 pastors and leadership teams. They're thinking, how can we start? I don't think any of us can start an evening congregation that's going to work for any individual church. What we can have is a church plan that serves all 4 churches. All the morning churches will say, this is our evening congregation. Right? And the evening congregation will say, we are in partnership with these 4 churches. Okay? That's what we're doing. Now, very hard, I think, in denominational settings for that to happen. Much easier in the network, a family of churches. We work together to achieve things. We've got now 3 regions that have got cooperative youth groups, because we found we were planting strong in that preschool, primary school area, weak in the high school area. So we figured actually churches in a similar region could collaborate for a youth group that the churches participate in, where the families are connected and there's trust and ownership in that space. Evening church, that's planned for next year, and then there are 2 further church plans that are lined up, that each of these 4 will participate in to different degrees depending on where they're going. But they've worked out the benefit of that collaborative space. Now, see the way that graph works? That's a sequencing thing. All 7 churches will be in exactly the same space as Modbury. They all are full family members of our network, but those 7 are going to be collaborating together as they think about their region in that partnership space. So we're just trying to think through, how do we keep starting new churches to reach new people in places we haven't gone to yet, is the way in which we're trying to think it through. Now, this is a church of 170. That's 3 times. And those 4 churches going again. Okay, so I suspect I've covered most people. And some of you are in this space anyway, but it's just helpful to try and see. Now, let me say, I've done none of this. It's really been these guys in the north who've driven and owned this space. I've cheered, but these guys are the ones who've been really working hard. What I thought I might do is just try and capture a few of our learnings. So there's about 10 things I'll just bounce through, if that's okay. I'm not sure what we'll get to in terms of time, but Erica Scott will tell us. So these are sort of the things I think we've picked up as we've gone along. And I'll just grab it through them very quickly. First thing is measure twice, cut once. One observation in church planting is often that people get the idea for a plant in their minds and move into it way too quickly. And what they do is, once they plant, they start to go, oh, we should have thought of this before. And so the danger is, if you don't think carefully enough, build your teams, clarify what you're trying to do, and you'll launch and do it then. And if you do that, you'll play church rather than do evangelism. Okay, so we've deliberately taken time. Often what we do is recruit someone into a space to plant, give them a year in a church, not thinking about planting, then give them a year to plant and to build the team, and then the beginning of the 3rd year launch. Okay, so that's often what we've done. If there are people in our network that we know really well, sometimes we will shorten that lead time because they've got the runs on the ground, and we don't feel like that. But taking a lot more time to do it than you think is necessary to plan that well. Gantt charts are your friend. Okay, it's just sort of thinking through what are the sequence of activities you need to do over what period of time, planning it out, and then systematically taking it. Now, let me say, I'm not a patient person. I feel like it's been agonisingly slow, the way we've gone about it, to be quite honest. But we tried to take time and to do things as well as we can. And I think in some ways that set us up for churches that have been healthier and been able to keep growing as they've gone. Second thing is, if you're in a sending church situation, I heard many of you before, you were saying we're thinking about sending. You've got to send your very, very best. Okay, you can't afford to not commit fully to the church plan, and that means allowing whoever's taking the team out free rein on who they take with them. That is a really hard thing to do, I found, but absolutely necessary. Now, here's my proviso here. You don't let them take everybody. So here we are, a church of 200. Take whoever you want. Whoa, I took 190. I'm not thinking that. You've got to set a sort of boundary marker. The boundary marker in size is determined by what you think is optimal for this church to start off and keep growing and reaching people with the gospel. And that's the metric you're trying to use as your assessment tool. Really good people and enough people to get them going. A couple of times I think we've planted with groups, if we went back to the growth factor over 5 years, a couple of times we started with larger planting groups and had slower growth. And I think it's because the larger you are when you start, the more work you've got to do relationally in that space as you build. We've actually found somewhere between that sort of 70 to 90 mark seems to be a sweet spot for us when we're doing that mother-daughter sort of planting thing. Third thing is, relates to the second one, but resource well when you plant. Don't do it on the smell of the morning rag. Try not to divide your resources in two directions to achieve what you're trying to do. So you strip down the mother church. Give sort of almost enough for the church plant to keep going. Try and prepare well and invest well in what you're doing. So probably, if it's at all possible, include sending someone to do admin in a church plant context, sending a student minister along, maybe an MTS trainer. If you don't send those people into church plants, you miss an incredible opportunity to train people for planting. What's the best place for someone to learn about church planting? Get in on the ground floor, give it a shot. So resource well. I talked about clarity of relationship between mother and daughter church. That's really important. I think that there is a great opportunity for partnership in that space. And what you want is people in the mother church who sent to hear how it's going. But you want the mother church to do it again. But it's good for them to hear how it's going. It's good for the daughter church to know that the mother church is praying and supporting. And often our mother church has provided resourcing on an occasional basis for daughter churches. So that partnership thing we kept working out well. Keep the vision front and center. Why are we planting a church? Is to reach people with the gospel. We're not just starting new Bible teaching churches so that people who haven't got a Bible teaching church can turn up. That might be a nice byproduct, but it's not the primary thing we're trying to do. Keep reminding people why we're doing it. God has been gracious and merciful to us. He wants people to come into the kingdom. That's what we plant churches. That's what we're on about. I've already mentioned the goers and the growers. People who are going, clear idea of what they're doing. People who are left behind often feel just a bit bereft. So it's important to recapture the sense of what we're doing at the mother church. The right planter is really important. One of the things to listen with Wade when he jumps up is to understand that the sort of person you might be looking for in a multi-site setting, multi-site setting, quite different from a church planter. That was one of the learnings for me when I listened in. I thought, oh, of course. And we're sort of a church planting, multi-site sort of structure. And the sort of people we're looking for are people who want to join a family, not people who hate their family and want to start something themselves. Not hate, but you know what I mean? They just do their own thing. And it affects who you're trying to get involved. And you're thinking about, because you have someone who's a real gun, initiator, and innovator, just try anything. But if they don't have the scope to work in that space, then they're probably going to get frustrated working with that sort of wider group. So think about getting the right sort of person. We've always, with our church plans, we've used the reach assessment stuff. And in some ways, I think we do a lot of the work that Reach does in that assessment space. But it's enormously helpful to have an objective set of eyes cast over people who are thinking about planting, a formal process where a couple are able to think about what they're doing, talk about it, and formally step through those sort of loops. So if you don't take advantage of that, I think you really do miss out. We're really thankful for the way Rich has all that sort of stuff. Property, let me make a comment on that. You don't need it. That is, we have one building we own and 13 we don't. So you don't need property. If you can get property and it's the right property, it's an advantage. We're now thinking about whether we need to do some investing in real estate. We've done it to this stage, though. We would have slowed up our plans, to be honest. So you've got to really assess that as you go along, the value of just taking that sort of step into that space. Because once you also have your building, then you've sort of fixed something with the shape and the location of your main street. Now, here's the proviso with that. If you saw our graph, you'll see that we've got a lot of churches in that 150 to 200 space. If you're trying to grow a church into the 500 space, you can do it without a building. Sydney on the Hill have done it. There are numbers of people who have. But I reckon it's actually tough to do it in rented spaces when you're getting that larger sized church. And that's what we're thinking about now. We've got that city church, 800. We're trying to think on our 20-minute ring whether we need some 500 plus size churches to take us to the next 20 minutes. Because currently our church planting on that 20-minute ring is too clustered for our life. It's too close because people don't travel as far to get to that size church. So we're thinking that we need some larger batteries and key points, key gateway points for our city to reach more people. I mentioned governance. Let me say I think that's really critical. Often people in our denominational circles, they receive a governance structure and they think we're just stuck with it. And you are quite possibly stuck with it. But what you're going to do is, for the sake of doing gospel work out what is your workaround? You might have a structure. How are you going to work around it to make disciples? Because often the structures limit what you're doing. Some of you aren't in that situation, but if you come from my sort of background pedigree, you need to work out how you don't get caught up in that sort of framework in a way that restricts you from doing the evangelistic work and being nimble enough, agile enough to actually go forward with the gospel. Let me just put in a brief plug for the value of keeping networked with your churches when you plant. Excuse me. I think there is I'm not against independent church plants and things like that, although if you know the history of independent church plants, they normally hit a wall and crash and burn with regularity, not regularity. I think that for us, being in a network structure has been enormously helpful for all of us. It helps us think about a city and a state, not just a local church. It helps us when we hit a crisis point, because if there's, we've had 2 times when a pastor has got a sickness, it's kept him out of action between 6 and 12 months. That's okay. It's a network we roll together. We're coming out. It's not just left to the local church. When there's moral failing, we've had very few of those, but it means someone like me just gets rolled into the space. And we think through how we're going to negotiate this together and how we care for a congregation and do those sort of things. It means that when we've had churches we've planted in more difficult socioeconomic situations, our board says, we've just got to keep supporting this work. They're doing good work on the ground, but they can't pay for it. It's okay. We're going to cover this. We as a network of churches, we've got to step into this breach and we make sure this is going to go well. And at the same time, if the church hits a difficult financial position, we can together cover off on that when we roll together. I think there are real benefits in thinking through how you go about that sort of space and what sort of structure you want that actually helps you keep doing that gospel service. Okay, so there's some of the questions. I'm going to hand back to Scott. Yeah.
Well, that was Paul and Sue Harrington from the Trinity Network. Always great wisdom from the both of them, and we hope that you enjoyed this, that this may have inspired you to think, yes, I can plant a multi-site church. If you'd like to know more about church planting, make sure you head to our website. I'm Pete Hughes. Chat soon.